So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah!
The Detroit Lions have a problem on defense. It's a problem that has caused them to lose their 3 games this season. It's a problem that continues to arise over and over throughout the Detroit Lions run in 2023. And if not fixed properly, this could be the problem that derails the entire 2023 season and prevents the Detroit Lions from finally reaching the heights of the NFL. Now, a lot of different people are going to argue about what this problem is for the Detroit Lions. A lot of people are going to say that it's on defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn. A lot of people are going to sit here and argue that it is a lot of positional coaches not coaching up their position groups properly. And there are some people that are going to blame Brad Holmes for not giving enough talent to Aaron Glenn. There's going to be people simply saying that, hey, some of your best players this offseason, including CJ Gardner-Johnson, your best safety, Emmanuel Mosley, arguably your best boundary cornerback, and James Houston, arguably your best pass rusher, have all missed a majority, if not all, of the 2023 season. And of course, after missing some of your superstars, your defense is not going to be very good. And today we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about all the facets of this defense, all the things that makes this defense not a very strong unit, and talk about what the true root problem is for Aaron Glenn and the Detroit Lions going through the remainder 6 games in the 2023 season and what the fix has to be. Now, taking a look at the defense under Aaron Glenn's reign, Aaron Glenn has not coached the Detroit Lions defense to a very successful place, right? In 2021, the Detroit Lions were in a full rebuild mode. They ranked as just the 31st defense in the NFL, the second worst in the NFL. And despite keeping the Detroit Lions in a number of games that year, they just weren't a statistically good defense. They gave up a lot of yards. They gave up a lot of points. They ranked 31st in the NFL in points per game allowed. And they were, to put it very, very fairly, arguably the worst defense in all of football. But that's understandable. It's the first year of a rebuild. You don't have very many pieces. You had a couple shining stars like Charles Harris come to play. You had a couple guys like Jerry Jacobs show up late in the season. There was some hope, and there was some players starting to stand out saying, hey, we can make some plays. We can be here for the long run. 2022 comes around, and the Detroit Lions defense is abysmal. They're giving up on average 30 points a game throughout the first month of the season. The Detroit Lions are 1-3 despite being the highest scoring offense in NFL history through the first month of the 2022 season. And even though the defense got better as the season went on, they still finished as just the 28th ranked unit in the NFL as far as points per game. But there was light. The defense got better at the end of the season, and they ranked very highly in a lot of statistical categories, even though it wasn't necessarily points per game. They were giving up less yards. They were returning into an elite rushing defense, and a lot of people had hoped that 2023 was finally going to be the year that the Detroit Lions had an elite defense. And for the first month or so, it was. Aaron Glenn had this defense as a top 10 defensive unit, the number 1 rushing defense, a top 15 pass defense, and a top 10 scoring defense across the entirety of the NFL, all the way up through week 6. But then the defense started to come unraveled. They gave up 38 points to Baltimore. They gave up 38 points coming out of the bye to the Chargers. They gave up 29 points on Thanksgiving to the Packers, 26 points to the Chicago Bears. And they're all of a sudden facing these not very good scoring defenses, right? The Packers ranking 24th, the Bears ranking 26th at the time of playing. They're playing teams that don't score very many points, and somehow they're being scored on 26, 29, 31, 38 points. And over the last month of the season, the Detroit Lions have allowed 29 points per game, all the way back to the Baltimore Ravens game. So the last 6 games of football, they've allowed 29 points per game, ranking them dead last in the NFL in points per game allowed, and have dropped them from a top 10 defense as far as points per allowed to, at this point, with 6 games left, they rank as the 25th best defense in the NFL. It is not good enough for the Detroit Lions, and we've seen early in the season that this defense can be good. So what's causing the drop-off? What's causing this defense to be so underperforming and so lackluster, despite the fact that they've shown flashes in the past and they've shown the ability to play like a top 15, if not a top 10 defenses at times? Well, some people are going to look at it and say that it is a talent issue, but I really don't think that's necessarily true. These are the assets that Brad Holmes has given Aaron Glenn over the last 3 years. He's given him Aiden Hutchinson with the 2nd overall pick. He spent 2 second-round picks on both Levi Onwuzurike and Josh Pascal. He spent multiple third-round picks on Aleem McNeil, on Broderick Martin. Even though he wasn't spent by Brad Holmes, there was a third-round pick in Julian Okwara invested in this team just a year before Aaron Glenn took the reins. They also spent $7 million a year on Charles Harris after his performances in 2021, as well as $4.5 million per year on John Kaminsky, who last year was one of the glue players on this defense and forced them to become a better unit down the stretch. So the defensive line has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 top 100 picks, as well as 2 free agents costing them $4 to $7 million a year on just the defensive line, and yet the defensive line can't seem to get any pass rush. Going into the linebackers, there's a little bit less going into it, but the linebackers have arguably been the best unit for the Detroit Lions. They spent $18 million this offseason to bring back Alex Anzalone to captain the defense. They spent a top 20 pick, a first-round selection on linebacker Jack Campbell. They spent a top 115 pick on Derek Barnes 3 years ago, selecting him at 113th overall in the 2021 NFL Draft. And even though he was selected in the 6th round, we've all seen Malcolm Rodriguez be one of the better rookie linebackers a year ago, who all of a sudden seems to be entirely underutilized and not even getting any opportunities on the defensive side of the ball, despite being arguably the best rookie linebacker from a season ago. And then you go to the secondary, where it continues to show what Brad Holmes has invested. $33 million to Cam Sutton, a 2nd-round pick in Brian Branch, a 3rd-round pick in Tracy Walker, a 3rd-round pick in Kirby Joseph, a 3rd-round pick in cornerback/safety Ifeatu Melifonwu, a 3rd-round pick in safety/slot cornerback Will Harris. There are 5 third-round slot cornerback/safeties on this team, as well as Brian Branch, who's a 2nd-round pick, and Cam Sutton, who cost $33 million. The defense has had quite a few assets added to it and has gotten significantly more attention than the offense. And despite that, Ben Johnson as the offense is a top 5 unit in the NFL, while Aaron Glenn can't seem to get this defense to even be serviceable. The Detroit Lions defense has 13 players over the last 3 years that have been selected within the top 100, as well as multiple other big free agents that have signed big money deals. To contrast that, the offense has received just 6 players on offense drafted in the top 100 picks of the NFL draft. That is, of course, Jahmyr Gibbs, that is Penei Sewell, that is Jameson Williams, that is Sam Laporta, as well as Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was not a top 100 pick, but was the 112th pick, which was close enough to the top 100 to still be relatively impactful. So the offense has 6, the defense has 13. The offense doesn't have very many big signings either. Jared Goff was an addition. He was pretty good for them, but he wasn't really signed by the Detroit Lions so much as just part of the Matthew Stafford trade. They brought in Graham Glasgow, who's pretty good, but he hasn't been kind of a backup. He's only been here for 1 year. That has nothing to do with the success of last year. Brock Wright was an undrafted rookie free agent who wasn't good enough to be drafted and yet turned into the Detroit Lions tight end 1 for multiple years. And the Detroit Lions offense has been elite since Ben Johnson has taken over, despite being given half the resources of Aaron Glenn. So it's not a talent issue. It's not an issue of Ben Johnson. It's not an issue of Brad Holmes not giving Aaron Glenn the resources to succeed, because he's been given almost twice as many resources as Ben Johnson. Now, again, there is an argument to be said that the Detroit Lions have lost a lot of playmakers this year on defense. James Houston, your best pass rusher. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, your best safety. Emmanuel Mosley, arguably your best cornerback and the guy you wanted to have go against all those physical, big, strong, fast wide receivers like your DK Metcalfs, your DJ Moores, and those type of players. They've all been hurt. Emmanuel Mosley made it 5 plays into the season after returning before unfortunately tearing his ACL again, right? CJ Gardner-Johnson made it about a game and a half, while James Houston made it about a game and a quarter. All these playmakers have been out for the Detroit Lions. And even though they're expected to see James Houston back within the last 2 to 3 weeks of the season, even though we're expected to see CJ Gardner-Johnson return for a potential playoff run, these guys have missed a majority of the season, and that has impacted Aaron Glenn's defense. But that doesn't impact the defense enough to make them the worst unit in football, right? That isn't enough to say, oh, you're missing 3 role players, you're missing even 3 starters, and you have the worst defense over the last 6 weeks of the NFL season. That's not good enough. And even though I could argue, and even though that I would listen to the arguments that say, okay, well, the pass rush hasn't developed properly, that is a problem with Aaron Glenn, right? Even if you want to say, oh, as of right now on paper, the Detroit Lions don't have enough talent for Aaron Glenn, that is a issue that Aaron Glenn has caused himself. He has not developed these players. He has 13 top 100 picks on that defense, enough for a full starting 11 and 2 backups, and yet the pass rush is abysmal. The secondary play is really, really poor. And the scheming around them doesn't help their players succeed or put them in positions to be successful. We can even take a look at Thanksgiving. A lot of people are going to say, oh, the Detroit Lions gave up 20 points in the first quarter. They were on pace at a point to get 80 points hung on them on Thanksgiving at home. And then people are going to say, okay, but the third quarter through the fourth quarter, right? The second half, they only allowed 6 points. They only allowed 9 points after that. And I would say to you, yes, the Detroit Lions had 6 stops on Thanksgiving. The defense had 6 stops, not including the final kneel down on the last drive of the game for the Green Bay Packers. There was a 1-play drive, a kneel down. That does not count as a stop for the Detroit Lions. So outside of that, they had 6 stops defensively. The first one was on 4th down, where A.J. Dillon literally had to run in to Jordan Love in order for the linebackers to have time to make a play. There were 3 drop passes in front of the sticks that the DBs really didn't influence very much at all. There was an underthrown go ball by Jordan Love, and that was the only one where I could argue that pressure maybe affected that throw, and yet Christian Watson was still wide open to walk into the end zone, and then there was a missed field goal. That was your 6 stops on Thanksgiving. 1 4th down, stop by themselves. 3 drops to convert and continue the drive. 1 underthrown pass, again, that would have been a walk-in touchdown, and a missed field goal after a turnover. That isn't good enough for the Detroit Lions defense. They didn't have a true stop on the entire day, and yet people are going to look at the box score and say, okay, but they only gave up 9 points in the last 3 quarters. Okay, this game is on the offense. Okay, the turnovers are so bad, putting the defense in such a poor spot. And those things are true, right? The last 2 games, I don't even necessarily put on Aaron Glenn, because obviously when the offense turns the ball over 4 times versus Chicago, it's going to be hard to hold the Chicago Bears to anything under 26 points. And I understand that, right? When your offense turns the ball over 3 times, when they fumbled 3 times versus the Green Bay Packers, obviously you're going to have some points put up on you, and that isn't great. But I'm not necessarily even concerned about the loss against Green Bay. I'm not even necessarily concerned about the close game versus Chicago, because if you take out the turnovers, you take away the defensive touchdown for Green Bay, the Detroit Lions win that football game, right? If you take away the 4 turnovers for Chicago, the Detroit Lions probably win that game very easily, if not very convincingly, by the end of the third quarter. So while Ben Johnson does have some blame for the last 2 performances of the Detroit Lions, I'm focused on just what the defense has shown over the last couple of months. So just what the defense has been able to accomplish over the last 6 to 8 games, and it's been absolutely abysmal. They have not provided any help for Aiden Hutchinson. They do not get very much pressure. They do not finish plays and do not get the quarterback on the ground. The fundamentals are very off. They don't tackle very well. They're not covering very well. They aren't blitzing very well. They aren't finishing plays on the quarterback very well. And those are all things that reflect on defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn. So with that being said, I do think a change needs to be made at the defensive coordinator position. As much as I want to root for Aaron Glenn, as much as I supported Aaron Glenn through the first year or 2 of the Detroit Lions defensive struggles, it really does seem like this defense will not succeed with Aaron Glenn. And part of that is the scheme. Obviously, the off-man coverage, the bailing immediately, the giving free releases is going to lead to NFL quarterbacks ripping this defense apart. Lamar Jackson did it. Geno Smith did it. Patrick Mahomes did it. Justin Herbert did it. And last couple of games, Justin Fields has done it, and now Jordan Love has done it. 2 quarterbacks within your division that are one in their first year starting, or really have won 6 games in their career. They're not good quarterbacks, or at least they're not experienced quarterbacks. No one in their right mind is going to say that Jordan Love or Justin Fields is a top-tier quarterback in the NFL. arguably top 20, but certainly not near the top 10. And yet they both looked like elite quarterbacks versus the Detroit Lions defense. That is a defensive coordinator issue. Not being able to develop your top 100 picks is a development issue and a problem for the defensive coordinator. And this is the big problem with the Detroit Lions defense is, yeah, their scheme is really poor. Yeah, their players aren't playing very well. Those things are true. But the biggest problem, and the biggest problem for the Detroit Lions future, is that they're not developing talent. Is that even though they've spent a lot of high picks on a lot of defensive players, most of those defensive players are either the same as when they got drafted or actively becoming worse and lesser NFL players. Kirby Joseph has regressed this year. Jerry Jacobs has regressed this year. I would argue that the only real players developing under Aaron Glenn are Aleem McNeil, who really mostly is on him after dropping 13 pounds to become a better pass rusher, and arguably Derek Barnes, after 3 years, has finally started to put it together to be a competent linebacker for the Detroit Lions. But the secondary is worse. The pass rush is worse. Romeo Okwara is worse. Julian Okwara is worse. The pass rush around Aiden Hutchinson is not very good. And Aiden Hutchinson has almost the exact same identical statistics through 11 games that he did a year ago. Aiden Hutchinson, I think, is better, but is not significantly better, has not taken a second-year jump that he should have been taking under a competent defense. Again, secondary members are not getting better. Linebackers are staying exactly where they are, and it's taking 2 to 3 years to see any kind of noticeable difference from linebackers drafted just outside the top 100. And even your first-round pick, Jack Campbell, seems to not be developing very well because of the scheme and because of the way he's being utilized by the Detroit Lions. Those all point to defensive coordinator issues, development issues, scheme issues, all eventually fall back on Aaron Glenn. And unfortunately for him, I really don't think he is going to be the guy to make this defense work. Now, I very much hope that I am wrong. I very much hope that through the last 6 weeks of the season, the Detroit Lions return to form, that James Houston returns, that CD Deuce returns, that they turn into a top 15 defense for a playoff run, because I think if they can, and the offense, of course, stops turning the football over, they can go on a deep run. We've seen the Detroit Lions play great football. We've seen the Detroit Lions play amazing games, but over the last month or so, they don't look like an 8-3 team. They look like a team that's barely scraping by. They look like a team who's struggling versus mid to below average football teams. They won 3 points versus the Chargers, who are, I believe, 5-6, if not 5-7 at this point. They won by 3 versus Chicago, or 5 versus Chicago, who is 3-8. They lost to the Green Bay Packers, who are 5-7. They aren't a very good football team over the last couple of months. They got blown out by Baltimore, and really the only complete game they've played over the last 5 or 6 has been the Las Vegas Raiders game, and even then they weren't completing. Even then their defense wasn't great. Yes, statistically they were a very good defense, but there was 2 deep shots completely missed by Jimmy Garoppolo. The turnover was just thrown right up to Kirby Joseph. The defense didn't do anything special in that game. They got lucky that Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't a very good quarterback, and the same can be said for other teams. Versus the Atlanta Falcons, they give up 6 points defensively, but there were multiple big throws missed by Desmond Ridder. You go through, of course, the Carolina game. That was probably their most complete game of the season. They still gave up 24 points to a team that is arguably the worst in football right now, and a rookie quarterback with very few weapons to throw to. Even after 2 interceptions, they gave up 24 points to the worst team in football. The Lions defense is not very good. They are a defense that has had a lot of talent injected into them. They're a defense that on paper should be at least top 20 in the NFL. That's not a tough ask for you with all the talent you've been given over the last 3 years. And yet, for some reason, the defense can't seem to figure it out. And after 3 years of one constant variable and the defense really not getting that much better, the only constant variable at this point is Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator. So with all that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. That is kind of the breakdown. That is the analysis of what is going on with the Detroit Lions defense. Why can't they get any stops? Why they're struggling so much? And what the most likely outcome is for this Detroit Lions defense. As much as I hate to say it, as much as I want Aaron Glenn to succeed and for the Detroit Lions to be great, I think the Detroit Lions have to move on from their first defensive coordinator under Dan Campbell in order to achieve the heights they want to reach in the very near future. But With all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Let me know down in the comments below what you think the biggest problem on defense is, what changes you think need to be made, because obviously something needs to give. With all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.